The moment I slid into seat 2A, my dad's voice cut through the cabin like it always did, sharp, ringing, and uncompromising. "You don't belong in first class," he said, making sure everyone around us heard. A few people laughed. My brother leaned back and smirked. "First class is for people who can actually afford it." I didn't argue. I didn't correct him. I just stayed quiet because growing up in my family taught me that defending myself only made things worse. What they never noticed was how long I'd stopped asking for their approval. Silence had become my survival skill. Patience my shield. Then the intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard," the pilot began. A pause followed too long to be casual. "And a special welcome to Ms. Riley. It's an honor to have our airline's chairwoman flying with us today." The laughter died mid-breath. My father froze. My brother's grin collapsed. The movement was instantaneous, a ripple of suspended attention that snapped toward my seat. I didn't explain who I was. I didn't correct a single thing they'd said, because the real story wasn't about that announcement. It was about why my own family never believed I could become her. And that truth was about to hurt a lot more than their laughter ever did. This wasn't the first time my father had humiliated me in public. It was simply the most recent in a lifetime of moments where he felt completely confident in making me small. His casual cruelty was the most telling detail. No hesitation, no deference, not even a fractional doubt that he might be mistaken. That was the thing about my father. He never considered being wrong about me. The flight attendant who'd witnessed the whole exchange was now standing awkwardly near the galley, pretending to organize something that didn't need organizing. A woman across the aisle gave me a small nod, something like respect in her eyes. My mother sat one row back, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't laughed when my father made his comment, but she hadn't stopped him either. She never stopped him. In 40 years of marriage, I couldn't recall a single time she'd contradicted him about anything that mattered. I remembered being 12 years old at my cousin's graduation party. My father had announced to the entire gathering that I was the difficult one in the family. He'd laughed when he said it as if it were a joke everyone was in on. I had stood there in my new dress, the one I'd saved my allowance for 3 months to buy, and felt myself shrink until I was nothing at all. I learned something that day. Defending myself only gave him more ammunition. So I stopped defending. I stopped explaining. I built walls so high and so thick that eventually I stopped feeling the need to be seen by any of them at all. The cabin had returned to its normal rhythm now. But the energy had shifted in an invisible way. People were still stealing glances at me. My father. At the space between us that suddenly seemed to contain something no one quite understood. My father cleared his throat. "They probably just say that sort of thing for important passengers," he said, loud enough for me to hear. "Some kind of upgrade protocol." He wasn't talking to me. He was talking past me to himself, to anyone who might still believe his version of reality. Chairwoman was just a word. It didn't mean anything real. His daughter couldn't possibly be someone significant. The universe didn't work that way. I could have corrected him, but explanations required someone willing to listen. My father had never been willing to listen to me. The flight attendant approached with champagne. She offered the glass to me first, her demeanor entirely different from moments ago. "Ms. Riley," she said, her voice carrying just enough for my father to hear, "is there anything special we can do to make your flight more comfortable today?" I took the glass. "No, thank you. I'm fine." She nodded and moved on, offering champagne to the other first-class passengers, but somehow managing to skip my father entirely. He noticed. His face reddened slightly. Daniel was texting furiously on his phone. I wondered who he was telling. My phone buzzed with a message from my assistant. "Happy birthday, boss. The board presentation is confirmed for next week. Also, the acquisition team needs your approval on the Henderson deal." Work continued. It always did. The world I had built for myself didn't stop spinning just because my family refused to see it. I looked out the window as the plane began to taxi toward the runway. Below us, the airport spread out like a miniature city. The intercom crackled again, the pilot's voice warm and professional. "Flight crew, prepare for departure." My father still hadn't looked at me. My mother was staring at her hands. Daniel had stopped texting and was now staring out his own window, his reflection a mask of something I couldn't quite read. This flight would last 3 hours. 3 hours of sitting in proximity to people who had never once seen me as I actually was. 3 hours of pretending that the announcement hadn't happened, that the pilot hadn't just confirmed everything they'd spent decades denying. But the real story, the one that mattered, wasn't about this moment. The real story was buried in years of family dinners where my accomplishments were glossed over, in graduations where my father talked only about Daniel's future. The real story was about how I had stopped waiting for them to see me and had started building something they could never take away. And as the plane lifted off the runway and the ground fell away beneath us, I realized something else. This flight wasn't just taking us to Connecticut. It was taking us all toward a reckoning that had been years in the making. My family didn't know about it yet, but they were about to learn that the daughter they had dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated had become something they never imagined possible. And the truth, when it finally came out, would hurt them far more than their laughter had ever hurt me. The cabin settled into the measured thrum of cruising altitude. Outside the window, clouds stretched in endless white plains, deceptively peaceful. Inside, the air between my family and me had grown thick with unspoken questions and carefully maintained silence. My father had positioned himself in his seat with the deliberate posture of a man refusing to acknowledge that anything had changed. His newspaper was open in front of him, though I noticed he hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. My mother had ordered tea she wasn't drinking. The cup sat cooling on her tray table while she smoothed the same crease in her skirt over and over, a nervous habit she'd had as long as I could remember. Daniel broke first. "So," he said, leaning across the aisle toward me with a casualness that didn't reach his eyes. "This chairwoman thing, when did that happen?" I turned from the window. "A while ago." "A while ago." He repeated my words slowly, testing them. "And you didn't think to mention it at Christmas, Thanksgiving, any of the family dinners where you sat there and said nothing. I wasn't aware I needed to file a report." His jaw tightened. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "Do I?" The flight attendant appeared between us, offering to refill drinks. The interruption gave Daniel time to regroup. When she moved on, his approach had shifted, softer now. "Look, I'm just surprised, that's all. You have to admit it's a lot to process." I returned my attention to the window. My father's voice cut through the pause. He still didn't look up from his newspaper. "Your brother's right. You should have told the family." The words were delivered with the same tone he used when correcting a subordinate at his law firm. Matter of fact. Final. "We shouldn't have found out this way." I let the silence stretch for a moment before responding. "Found out what exactly?" Now he looked up. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw uncertainty. He wasn't sure what I was asking, whether I was challenging him. "Whatever this is," he gestured vaguely toward the front of the plane, "this chairwoman business. It's not business, it's my position." "Same thing." He folded his newspaper with precise movements. "The point is, family matters should be discussed within the family first. You know how it looks when we're caught off guard like this." There it was, concern for how things looked, how they appeared. The Harrington family reputation potentially embarrassed by a daughter who had achieved something without their knowledge or permission. "I wasn't aware the family was interested in my career developments," I said instead. My voice was even, calm, the same tone I used in board meetings when someone tried to derail the agenda. My mother finally spoke. "Cassie, that's not fair. We've always been interested in your life." I turned to look at her. The pleasant expression she wore was like armor against any unpleasantness. "When was my birthday?" I asked. She blinked. "What?" "My birthday. When is it?" Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her eyes darted to my father, seeking rescue. None came. It's coming up, isn't it? In the spring?" "It's today." The word landed like a stone in still water. My mother's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, embarrassment. "Of course," Of course it is. I'm sorry, sweetheart, with all the preparation for the anniversary party, it's fine. I cut off the explanation before it could fully form. I wasn't expecting anything. Daniel shifted in his seat. 34 today, he said. Big year. The fact that my brother knew my age when my mother didn't know the date felt like its own kind of verdict on our family. My father cleared his throat. We can discuss all of this at home. Your mother's party is the priority right now. 40 years is a significant milestone. Let's keep the focus where it belongs. Where it belongs. On them. On anything other than the daughter who had achieved something without their blessing. The flight attendant approached again, this time with a small plate of chocolates, arranged in a decorative pattern. A small birthday acknowledgement from the crew, Miss Riley, she said, her voice warm. We hope your day is special. She placed the plate on my tray table with a genuine smile. My family watched in silence as a stranger showed me more birthday recognition in 30 seconds than they had managed in 34 years. They know who she is, Daniel observed. There was an edge to his voice now. Everyone on this plane knows who she is, except us. That's enough. My father's tone carried the warning he'd used throughout our childhood, but I wasn't a child anymore, and his warnings no longer carried weight. You're right, I said to Daniel. Everyone knows who I am, everyone except the people who share my last name. My father's face reddened. He wasn't used to being challenged. We'll discuss this at home, he repeated, but the authority in his voice had slipped. He was reaching for control and finding only air. The rest of the flight passed in fragments of strained normalcy. No one asked about my work. No one asked how I'd become the chairwoman of an airline. No one asked about my life, my days, my world that existed entirely outside their awareness. They asked nothing because I realized they didn't actually want to know. Knowing would require acknowledging that I had become something they hadn't authorized, that I had succeeded not because of them, but in spite of them. As the pilot announced our descent into Hartford, my father finally spoke again. His voice was quiet now, almost cautious. When we get to the house, let's not make this weekend about you. Your mother has been planning this party for months. She deserves to have her moment without any complications. Complications. That's what I was. I understand, I said. The plane touched down with a gentle bump. My father stood first, reaching for his bag. He didn't wait for me. My mother followed him, her hand briefly touching my shoulder as she passed. Daniel lingered. We should talk later, he said. Just us. I want to hear about this chairwoman thing. Do you? Yeah. He nodded slowly. I think I really do. Then he was gone. I stayed for a moment longer, watching through the window. When I finally stood and made my way off the plane, my family was waiting in the jetway. Let's go, my father said without looking up. We'll discuss everything properly at home. I followed them through the airport, a stranger walking among strangers who happened to share my blood. But something had shifted in the hours since takeoff. A line had been crossed, a truth had been spoken into the air by someone outside our family's careful fiction. My family didn't know it yet, but the reckoning had already begun. The house looked exactly as I remembered it. White colonial with black shutters, the lawn a manicured green tapestry extended to the curb. A flagpole displaying the American flag alongside the Connecticut state flag, a touch my father had added during his brief interest in local politics. Everything about this house was designed to project stability, success, the kind of family other families envied. Standing in the driveway, I felt the familiar weight of homecoming settle over me. Not warmth, not comfort, weight. We entered through the side door, the one that led through the mudroom into the kitchen. My mother immediately began checking on preparations for tomorrow's party. Caterers would arrive at 9, the florist at 10, guests at 6. 40 years of marriage celebrated with military precision. My father disappeared into his study without a word. Daniel followed him. I heard the door close, then muffled voices. Discussing me, probably. Strategizing, deciding how to handle the complication I had become. I brought my bag upstairs to my old bedroom. It had been converted into a guest room years ago, all traces of my teenage self erased in favor of neutral bedding and tasteful art prints. Only the view remained the same. The massive maple tree outside its intricate lattice of winter branches etched against the pale spring sky. I unpacked mechanically. Hung tomorrow's outfit in the closet, placed toiletries in the bathroom I would share with no one, went through the motions of being a guest in the house I grew up in. The knock came around 6. "Cassie." My father's voice through the door, not a request, a summons. "Come down to the living room. We should talk." The living room was arranged as it always was for family discussions. My father is in his armchair by the fireplace. My mother is in the love seat, Daniel on the couch, leaving space that clearly indicated where I was expected to sit. A tribunal. That's what it felt like, the accused being called before the court. I sat. "Your mother and I have been discussing the situation," my father began. He was using his lawyer voice, measured, authoritative, "and we think it's important to clear the air before the party tomorrow." Clear the air. Yes, about this development of yours. Development, as if my career were a minor inconvenience, an unexpected growth that needed to be addressed. "What would you like to know?" He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Let's start with why your family was kept in the dark." The accusation was implicit. I had deceived them, hidden things, been secretive and untrustworthy. "I wasn't in the dark," I said evenly. "I knew exactly where I was going, what I was building." "That's not what I asked." "No, it's not." The silence stretched. My mother's hands were twisted in her lap again, that anxious wringing. Daniel was watching our father, waiting for his cue. "Let me be more direct," my father said. "This chairwoman position, how did it happen? Who gave it to you?" "No one gave it to me. I earned it." "How?" I could have explained the years of work, the late nights and early mornings, the strategic decisions and calculated risks, the pieces I had assembled with patience and precision until I held enough to claim what was mine. But something stopped me, an old memory rising to the surface like a bubble from deep water. "Do you remember when I was 23? I asked instead. My father's brow furrowed. "What does that have to do with anything?" "I applied for the Worthington Fellowship. It was a program for young entrepreneurs, very competitive. 3 years of mentorship, seed funding, access to industry leaders." I watched my father's face for recognition, for any sign that he remembered. He didn't. "I was selected," I continued. "From over 2,000 applicants, I was one of 12 chosen." My mother looked confused. "I don't remember you mentioning this." "I didn't get to mention it, because 3 days before the announcement you told me they had rejected me." The words hung in the air. My father's expression shifted, just slightly, a micro-movement around his eyes that someone who hadn't spent a lifetime studying his face might have missed. He remembered. "That was a long time ago," he said. "Yes, it was. And I did what I thought was best for the family." There it was. The admission was wrapped in justification. Daniel leaned forward. "Wait, what are we talking about here? What fellowship?" I turned to look at my brother, the golden child, the one who had received every opportunity, every support, every benefit of the doubt. "The Worthington Fellowship was going to launch my career 11 years earlier than it actually launched," I said. "It would have given me connections, resources, mentorship from people who had built exactly what I wanted to build." "And Dad said you were rejected." "Dad made sure I was rejected." The room went very still. My father's hands had tightened on the arms of his chair. "That's an exaggeration." "Is it?" "I found the emails, Dad. All of them. The one you sent to the selection committee expressing concerns about my stability. The follow-up where you suggested I might not be ready for such responsibility. The final one where you thanked them for their understanding about a difficult family situation." My mother's face had gone pale. "Robert, what is she talking about?" "It was complicated," my father said, but his voice had lost its authority. "You were young, too ambitious. You needed to learn patience to follow the proper path. The proper path was the one you chose for Daniel, not for me. Daniel was staring at our father now. "Did you really do that?" "He did what he thought was best for the family." I repeated my father's own words back to him. "Isn't that right, Dad? That's what you always say when you've decided something for someone else. It's for the family, for their own good, for the proper order of things." The fireplace crackled. Outside, a car passed on the quiet street. "I was supposed to be the difficult one," I continued. "The one who needed guidance. The one who couldn't be trusted with her own decisions. And you made sure the world saw me that way, even when it wasn't true." "That's not," my father started. "Let me finish." My voice was calm, controlled. Years of practice speaking in boardrooms had taught me how to hold a room's attention without raising my voice. I didn't find those emails until 3 years ago. By then I had already built something, without the fellowship, without the mentorship, without any of the things you took away from me. I paused. But I found something else when I was looking through those old records, something I think you hoped I would never see. My father's face had gone rigid. The stock transfers, the ones you made in Daniel's name when I was 23, the same month you sabotaged my fellowship application. My mother made a small sound, not quite a gasp, more like air escaping from a tire. "That was estate planning," my father said quickly. "Perfectly normal estate planning. It had nothing to do with—" "It was my inheritance," I said. "Grandpa left that stock to both of us equally. But you transferred my share to Daniel's portfolio and told me the original request had been a mistake in the paperwork." Daniel had gone very still. "I didn't know that." "Of course you didn't. Why would you question anything that came your way? You were the golden child. Everything you received was your due. Everything I lost was my own fault." The room felt smaller now, walls pressing in, the perfect living room with its coordinated decor and family photos on the mantel, all of it suddenly exposed as a facade. "You had already decided who I was allowed to be," I said, "before I had the chance to decide for myself. And every time I came close to becoming something more, you found a way to stop it." My father stood abruptly. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You've built this narrative in your head, this story, where you're the victim and everyone else is conspiring against you. That's not how it was. That's not how this family works." "Then how does it work?" "Tell me. I'd really like to know." He didn't answer. My mother was crying silently. Daniel looked like he was trying to solve an equation that kept coming out wrong. "It doesn't matter now," I said, standing to face my father. "What's done is done. I built what I built. I became who I became, without your help, without your blessing, without your permission." I moved toward the door. "Where are you going?" my mother asked. "To my room. We have a big day tomorrow. Your anniversary party. 40 years. Let's try to keep the focus where it belongs." I left them there, in their perfect living room with their imperfect truths scattered across the expensive rug. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice strained and pleading. "Robert, what did you do?" I didn't stay to hear his answer. At the top of the stairs, I paused. I looked down at the family photos lining the wall. Years of Christmas cards and graduation pictures and vacation snapshots. A family that looked from the outside like everything a family should be. They didn't misunderstand me. They decided who I was allowed to be. And now they would have to live with the consequences of that decision. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in the guest bed that used to be my bed, staring at the ceiling, where glow-in-the-dark stars had once spelled out constellations, now painted over in tasteful eggshell white. The house settled around me with familiar creaks. The radiator was ticking as it cooled, the wind moving through the maple branches outside. Sounds I had grown up with, sounds that used to mean safety. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep. I opened my laptop instead. The blue glow illuminated the tasteful, sterile walls as I navigated to a folder I had created 3 years ago. A folder labeled simply Records. Inside were screenshots, email chains, bank statements, a paper trail that had taken months to piece together. I had first stumbled onto the truth by accident. A routine audit of my personal finances had turned up an anomaly. A stock transfer from 15 years earlier that listed me as the original owner before redesignating the shares to Daniel. The transfer had been signed by my father with power of attorney I had never granted. That discovery had opened a door I couldn't close. I scrolled through the documents now, not because I needed to review them, but because looking at the evidence reminded me that I wasn't imagining things. That the family narrative I had been fed my entire life was built on lies. The fellowship emails were the hardest to look at. I had been so young, so full of belief in my own potential, and my father had methodically dismantled that potential before it could even begin. The reply from the Worthington Committee chairman was particularly painful. "We appreciate you bringing these concerns to our attention, Mr. Harrington. Given the circumstances you've described, we agree that it may be best to redirect the fellowship to a candidate with a more stable situation." A more stable situation. Because my father had told them I was unstable, had fabricated a story about mental health struggles and family difficulties, had painted me as someone who couldn't be trusted with opportunity. I closed the laptop, sat in the darkness. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself. It happens in quiet rooms and private conversations. It happens behind closed doors while you're out living your life believing the people who claim to love you would never work against you. I thought about all the years I had blamed myself, the rejections I had taken as evidence of my own inadequacy, the opportunities that seemed to slip away no matter how hard I worked. I had internalized the message my family had been sending. You're not good enough, you're not stable enough, you're not enough. But I was enough. I had always had enough. They just couldn't allow me to know it. A soft knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. "Cassie." My mother's voice barely above a whisper. "Are you awake?" I didn't answer immediately. Let her stand there in the hallway for a moment. "Yes." The door opened slowly. My mother stood silhouetted against the hallway light, her robe wrapped tight around her thin frame. She looked older than she had that afternoon, diminished somehow. "Can I come in?" I turned on the bedside lamp, gestured to the chair by the window. She sat carefully as if the chair might break. For a long moment she didn't speak, just sat there with her hands clasped looking at the floor. "I didn't know," she finally said. "About all of it. The fellowship, the stock transfers. I swear I didn't know." I watched her face, looking for the tell, the sign that she was lying to save herself. But all I saw was exhaustion, and maybe something that looked like shame. "You knew something," I said. "You've always known something was wrong with how this family treated me." "I knew your father and Daniel had a special bond, that they understood each other in ways I couldn't always follow." She paused. I hoped you and I had our own bond." "Did we?" Her eyes met mine. Tears were forming, but she blinked them back. "I tried, Cassie. In my own way, I tried. Trying isn't the same as doing. Trying not to stand up to Dad when he dismissed everything I accomplished. Trying isn't remembering my birthday. Trying isn't protecting me." "I know," her voice cracked. "I know." We sat in silence. The maple tree scratched against the window. Somewhere in the house a floorboard creaked. "He told me once," my mother said slowly, "that you were too ambitious. That your ambitions would hurt you if they weren't managed." Managed. His word. I asked him what he meant. He said you didn't understand how the world worked, that you needed protection from yourself. She wiped her eyes. I believed him. Or I let myself believe him because it was easier than arguing. And Daniel was Daniel too ambitious. Daniel was different. Your father saw himself in Daniel. The same temperament, the same drive, the same way of looking at the world. And what did he see in me? My mother was quiet for a long moment. "He saw your grandmother, his mother. A woman who challenged him, questioned him, refused to accept his authority. They never reconciled before she died. I think he was afraid you would be the same." I absorbed this. My grandmother had died before I was born. I knew almost nothing about her except that she was rarely mentioned. "So he decided to neutralize the threat," I said, before I could challenge anything. "I don't know if he thought of it that way, but yes, he wanted to keep things under control, keep the family structure intact. With Daniel at the top and me at the bottom, My mother didn't disagree. I stood and walked to the window. The neighborhood was dark and quiet, houses full of families with their own secrets. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw your face today, on the plane, when he said what he said, and I realized I've been watching that same expression for 30 years and pretending it didn't matter." "Did it matter to you? It should have mattered more." I turned back to face her. This woman who had given birth to me, raised me, watched me struggle, who had chosen peace over justice every single time. "The party tomorrow," I said, 40 years of marriage, that's what you're celebrating. It's what I'm expected to celebrate. Do you want to celebrate it?" She didn't answer, and in that silence, I heard everything she had never been brave enough to say. "Go to bed, Mom. Tomorrow will be a long day." She rose slowly from the chair, paused at the door. "I'm sorry, Cassie, for all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know." "I know you're sorry. I've always known you were sorry. But sorry didn't change anything." She nodded once, and then she was gone. I sat back down on the bed. My laptop was still closed on the nightstand. Inside it, all those documents, all that proof of systematic betrayal. But tonight had given me something the documents couldn't: context, understanding, the map of how it had all happened. My father saw his mother in me, a woman who challenged him, and rather than face that challenge, he had spent decades dismantling any power I might accumulate. What he hadn't anticipated was that I would find other paths, quieter paths, ways of building that didn't require his permission or his approval. The airline shares I had accumulated weren't in my name alone. I had used holding companies' trusts and strategic partnerships. By the time anyone connected the dots, I already held enough to claim the chairmanship. My father had taught me something valuable, even if he hadn't meant to. He had taught me that some battles can't be won through direct confrontation, that sometimes the only way forward is around, through, underneath. I picked up my phone, scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in months. "Eleanor," I typed, "I need a favor. Can you pull the Harrington family trust documents? I want to see everything my father has been managing." The reply came within minutes, even at this late hour. Eleanor never slept when there was work to be done. "Already on it. I had a feeling you might ask. We'll have a full report by Monday." I smiled in the darkness. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally stopped waiting to be seen by people who had chosen to be blind. Tomorrow will be my mother's anniversary party. 40 years of marriage, 40 years of carefully maintained appearances, 40 years of a family structure built on the foundation of my diminishment. But tomorrow would also be the beginning of something else, something my father never saw coming because he had spent so long refusing to see me at all. The truth was already in motion, and once it finished moving, nothing in this family would ever be the same. The morning of the anniversary party broke with a heavy steel-gray sky. I stood at my window watching caterers' vans pull into the driveway, workers in white shirts unloading trays and equipment with practiced efficiency. My mother was already in full hostess mode, directing traffic from the kitchen. My father had retreated to his study, avoiding the chaos. Daniel hadn't emerged from his room yet. I showered, dressed in something appropriately understated, and went downstairs to make myself useful. Not because I wanted to help celebrate 40 years of my parents' marriage, but because moving through the preparations gave me access to the house in ways that being a guest did not. The caterers barely noticed me. The florist was too busy arguing with my mother about centerpiece placement. I was invisible, the forgettable daughter, just as I had always been. This invisibility served me well. While everyone was distracted, I slipped into my father's study. He was in the backyard reviewing the tent setup with the party coordinator. His computer was still on. His email is still open. I didn't have much time. My fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Years of building a company had taught me efficiency. I knew exactly what I was looking for. The folder labeled Estate Planning. The subfolder is labeled Trust Modifications. And there it was. A document dated 12 years ago. Amendment to the Harrington Family Trust. I scanned the contents. technical language about beneficiary designations and distribution schedules, and buried in paragraph 7, a clause I had never seen before. Upon the death of Robert Harrington Sr., all remaining trust assets shall be distributed to Daniel Robert Harrington as primary beneficiary. Cassandra Marie Harrington shall receive a lump sum of $50,000 in lieu of any ongoing interest in the trust. $50,000 out of a trust worth millions. I took a photo with my phone, then another of the signature page, my father's signature, my mother's signature, a notary stamp from a firm in Hartford. The document was dated 1 week after my grandmother's funeral, the same grandmother my mother had mentioned last night, the one who had challenged my father, the one he had never forgiven. He had rewritten the trust while I was still mourning, while I was 22 years old and had no idea that documents like this even existed. Footsteps in the hallway. I closed the folder, stepped away from the computer, and was examining a book from the shelf when my father walked in. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for something to read." I held up a volume of American history. "The party preparation is overwhelming." He studied me for a moment, suspicious but not alarmed. He had no reason to think I would look at his files, no reason to believe the invisible daughter had learned to see. "The party starts at 6, he said. "I expect you to be presentable and cooperative. No discussions about yesterday, no scenes. This is your mother's day." "Of course." He waited for something more, a challenge, an argument, the defiance he had trained himself to expect from me. I gave him nothing. He nodded once and left. Back in my room, I forwarded the photo to Eleanor. "Add this to the file. I want a full analysis of what this means legally." Her response came quickly. "Initial read this amendment was executed improperly. Your signature should have been required for changes of this magnitude. I'll have more by tomorrow." I put down the phone, sat on the edge of the bed, let myself feel for just a moment the weight of what I had discovered. My own father had written me out of the family inheritance, had done it secretly, illegally, and with the full knowledge that I would never know until he was dead, and it was too late to challenge. This wasn't just favoritism. This wasn't just preferring Daniel over me. This was erased. Systematic, documented, deliberate erasure. I thought about the girl I had been at 22, grieving my grandmother, trying to find my place in a family that had already decided I didn't have one. If I had known then what I knew now, would it have broken me, or would it have set me free sooner? It didn't matter. I know now. And knowledge, as they say, is power. The party began to take shape downstairs. I heard the doorbell ring, guests arriving early, the murmur of voices and clink of glasses. My mother practiced laughter. I checked my reflection in the mirror, adjusted my earrings, smoothed my hair. Time to play my part. The living room was transformed, white flowers everywhere. A string trio played classical selections from a discreet corner. Champagne circulated on silver trays. My parents stood near the fireplace receiving congratulations. 40 years of marriage, an accomplishment worth celebrating if you didn't look too closely at what those years had cost. I moved through the room accepting polite greetings from relatives I barely knew, aunts and uncles who remembered me as a child, cousins who had heard the family narrative and believed it. "Cassie, you look wonderful. Cassie, we never see you anymore. Cassie, your parents must be so proud." I smiled and nodded and said the appropriate things. Yes, it had been too long. Yes, I was doing well. Yes, my parents were certainly proud. The lies came easily. They always had. Daniel found me near the bar. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His wife Jennifer was somewhere else working the room with the ease of someone who had married into exactly the life she wanted. "We should talk," he said, "about yesterday. Now, later, after the toasts." He moved away before I could respond, but there was something in his expression I hadn't seen before, uncertainty, maybe even fear. The evening proceeded according to schedule, toasts to the happy couple, stories about their courtship. Photos projected on a screen showing 40 years of family history. I appeared in some of those photos, always at the edge, always slightly out of focus, a presence that could be cropped out without anyone noticing. My father gave a speech about partnership and commitment. My mother wiped away tears. Guests raised their glasses to decades of love. and I stood among them holding my champagne, knowing what I knew, seeing what I saw. The party wound down around 11. Guests departed with hugs and promises to stay in touch. The caterers began cleaning up. My mother finally sat down exhausted and satisfied. Daniel appeared at my elbow. "Now." I followed him to the back porch. The night air was cold but not unbearable. We stood in the darkness looking out at the backyard where so many family gatherings had taken place. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," he began. "About the fellowship, the stock transfers, all of it." I waited. "I didn't know, Cassie. I swear I didn't know about the fellowship, about Dad sabotaging you." "But you knew about the stock." He hesitated. "I knew I received shares that were supposed to be split. Dad said it was a tax strategy, that you had agreed to it. And you believed him." "Why wouldn't I? He's our father. He's always done what's best for the family." "What's best for you, for him, not for the family, not for me." Daniel turned to face me. In the dim light, he looked younger, more like the boy I remembered from childhood before the roles had calcified, before he became the golden child, and I became the mistake. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry for not asking questions, for accepting what was given to me without wondering who it was taken from." It was more than I had expected from him, more self-awareness than I thought he possessed. "There's more," I said. "Things I found today, things about trust." His expression shifted. "What things?" "Dad rewrote the trust after Grandma died. He cut me out almost entirely. Give everything to you." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Are you sure?" "I have the documents." "Jesus." He ran a hand through his hair. "Jesus, Cassie, I had no idea it went that far." "Would it have mattered if you did?" He didn't answer, and that silence told me everything I needed to know about my brother. He wasn't evil. He wasn't even particularly malicious. He was simply someone who had never had to think about where his advantages came from. "What are you going to do?" he asked finally. "I don't know yet. I'm still gathering information." "If you're planning to go to war with Dad, I need to know. I have a family, a business. Things could get complicated." "Everything's already complicated, Daniel. It has been for a long time. We were just pretending otherwise." I left him on the porch, went back inside, found my mother cleaning up in the kitchen. "You should rest," I said. "The caterers will handle this." She looked up at me. Her eyes were red from the emotional evening, but there was something else there too, a question she wasn't brave enough to ask. "Good night, Cassie. Thank you for being here." "Good night, Mommy." I climbed the stairs to my room, closed the door, sat in the darkness with my phone in my hand. Eleanor had sent another message. "Trust amendment is definitely improper. Multiple grounds for challenge, but the statute of limitations makes it complicated. We need to talk about strategy." I typed back, "Monday, first thing, and pull everything else you can find. If there's one hidden document, there are probably more." I set the phone aside. I looked out at the maple tree. My father had spent decades building walls around his power, around his narrative, around the family structure he had designed to serve himself. But walls have foundations, and foundations can be undermined. I didn't know yet exactly what I would do. Confrontation seemed pointless. Legal action was possible, but messy. Going public would destroy relationships that were already damaged beyond repair. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being invisible. I was done being erased. And whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. I left Connecticut on Sunday afternoon. My mother hugged me at the door. My father shook my hand. Daniel watched from the window as I got into the car that would take me to the airport. 3 days later, I was in Manhattan, a different world from the quiet streets of my parents' neighborhood, glass and steel, the constant movement of people who had somewhere to be. Eleanor had arranged the meeting, a private room at a law firm in Midtown. Not her firm, somewhere neutral, somewhere my father's name didn't carry weight. The woman waiting for me was striking with the composed posture of someone whose authority was never questioned. Her silver hair was drawn back impeccably. Victoria Chen, one of the top trust litigation attorneys in the country, Eleanor had called her the person you go to when you need to understand the game you're actually playing. Ms. Riley. Victoria extended her hand. Eleanor speaks highly of you. She speaks highly of you. We sat across from each other at a long conference table. Victoria had already reviewed the documents I had sent, the trust amendment, the fellowship emails, the stock transfers. Let me start with the obvious question, she said. What outcome are you hoping for? I had thought about this during the flight, during the sleepless nights since the party, during every moment I wasn't distracted by the demands of running an airline. I want to understand my options, all of them, before I decide anything. Victoria nodded. Smart. Most people come in wanting to burn everything down. That rarely ends well. She opened a folder, spread papers across the table. Here's what we're looking at. The trust amendment from 12 years ago is vulnerable on several grounds. Your signature should have been required. The notarization appears to have been improper. And there's evidence of what we call undue influence, given the timing and circumstances. So I could challenge it? You could, but there are complications. She pointed to a timeline she had drawn. The statute of limitations for direct challenge has likely expired. However, there are other avenues. Fraud claims have different timelines, and if we can demonstrate ongoing concealment, we can argue the clock hasn't started yet. How likely is success? Honestly, hard to say. These cases are unpredictable. Judges have a lot of discretion, and your father is well connected in Connecticut legal circles. I absorbed this. What about the stock transfers? The fellowship sabotages? The stock transfers are simpler. Those were your assets improperly transferred without your consent. We can make a strong case for restitution. And the fellowship, Victoria leaned back. That's where it gets interesting. Your father didn't just write a letter expressing concern. He made specific false statements to the selection committee. That's defamation, tortious interference, potentially fraud. Potentially. The challenge is proving damages. You've done remarkably well without the fellowship. A court might say you have no grounds to claim harm. I thought about the years of struggle, the extra time it took to build what I built, the opportunities lost, the confidence shattered. The harm was real. I believe you, but courts deal in numbers, dollars, quantifiable loss. We sat in silence for a moment. The city hummed outside the windows. Let me ask you something else, Victoria said. Your father, what kind of man is he? Controlling, traditional. He believes in hierarchies, order, his word being law. And when challenged, he doubles down, finds ways to reassert control. He doesn't admit mistakes. Victoria nodded slowly. That's useful information. Because here's what most people don't understand about situations like yours. The legal system is one tool, but it's not the only tool, and sometimes it's not even the best tool. What do you mean? I mean that men like your father, they thrive on direct confrontation. It gives them a battlefield they understand, rules they can manipulate, a stage where they can perform righteousness. So what's the alternative? Victoria leaned forward. Systems. Consequences that come through systems rather than conflict. If your father did what you believe he did, he left traces. Paper trails, people who witnessed things, patterns that can be documented. And then you let the system work. Not the legal system necessarily, the social system, the professional system, the family system. Once certain truths become known to certain people, consequences follow without anyone having to swing a sword. I considered this. It aligned with something I had learned in business. The most effective power moves were often invisible. Changes in board composition that seemed routine until they weren't. Strategic acquisitions that looked random until the pattern emerged. You're talking about exposure without accusation. I'm talking about letting reality speak for itself. Your father built a narrative. You can build a different one. Document everything. Verify everything. And then let the documentation exist where it can be seen. By whom? That depends on what outcome you want. Family members who might benefit from knowing the truth, professional colleagues who might reconsider their respect for him, future generations who deserve an accurate record. I stood. I walked to the window. The city stretched out below millions of people navigating their own complicated lives. My father believes he was protecting the family, I said, maintaining order, keeping everyone in their proper place. And what do you believe? I believe he was protecting himself, his authority, his vision of how things should be. Then that's the story that needs to be told, not with accusations, not with legal filings, just with truth documented and undeniable. I turned back to face her. What would you do if you were me? Victoria smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had spent decades navigating battles most people couldn't imagine. I would gather everything, verify everything, build a complete record, and then I would wait. For what? For the moment when the record matters most, when your father's house of cards is vulnerable, when the truth landing in the right place at the right time will do more damage than any lawsuit ever could. That could take years. It could, or it could happen next week. The point is being ready. I thought about the meeting scheduled for Monday, the Henderson acquisition that needed approval. The board presentation is coming up. And I thought about my father still believing he had control, still confident that the daughter he had dismissed would never understand the game he was playing. He had taught me more than he knew. Every time he had outmaneuvered me, I had learned something. Every door he had closed, I had found another way around. There's something else you should know, I said. My brother, Daniel. He seemed genuinely surprised by what I told him, maybe even disturbed. Interesting. Is he a potential ally? I don't know yet. He's benefited from everything my father did, but he also has a conscience, or at least the remnants of one. Then that's another variable to consider. Brothers are complicated. They can be your greatest ally or your most dangerous enemy, sometimes both at once. I gathered my things. The meeting had given me what I needed. Not a plan exactly, but a framework. A way of thinking about what came next. At the door, Victoria stopped me. One more thing. You mentioned your father sees his mother in you, a woman who challenged him. That's what my mother said. Then consider this. Your grandmother died without reconciling with him, without ever having the confrontation that might have cleared the air. She went to her grave with that unfinished business between them. And now you exist. The one who reminds him of her, the one who won't be controlled, the one who succeeded despite everything he did. Victoria paused. You are the confrontation he could never have. Every achievement you accumulate, every bit of power you gain, it forces him to face what he could never face with her. You don't have to say a word. You just have to keep becoming. I left the building, stepped into the March wind. The city swirled around me, indifferent and vast. She was right. I didn't need to confront my father. I didn't need to make accusations or file lawsuits or demand apologies that would never come. I just needed to keep becoming what he had spent my whole life trying to prevent me from being. And that was already happening. It has been happening for years. The revenge wasn't in the future. It was already in motion. 3 weeks passed. I returned to my normal life. The airline, the board meetings, the steady work of running something large and complex. But beneath the surface, things were shifting. The first sign came through channels I hadn't anticipated. A business deal my father had been pursuing for months had stalled. Nothing dramatic, just delays that kept extending. Approvals that got lost in bureaucracy. Partners who suddenly needed more time to review the terms. My father blamed market conditions, regulatory uncertainty, the usual excuses. He didn't know that the holding company he was trying to acquire had recently entered discussions with a larger entity, an entity that happened to be advised by people I knew, people who might have raised questions. Not accusations, just questions. The second sign was more personal. My mother called me one evening, her voice strained. Your father had a difficult day, she said. Some colleagues from his old firm stopped by. They wanted to discuss something about a case from years ago. He was very upset after they left. What case? I don't know. He wouldn't tell me, but he spent the rest of the evening in his study. He didn't eat dinner. I didn't ask more questions. I hadn't spread any information, hadn't weaponized it. But information has a way of surfacing when conditions are right. Daniel called me the following week. His voice was different from how it had been at the party. Cautious. Maybe even worried. "Something's going on with Dad," he said. "He's acting strange, checking his emails constantly, making calls behind closed doors." I asked him about it, and he just said, "Business matters." Maybe it is a business matter. Maybe. But it feels like more than that, like he's waiting for something bad to happen. "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Because I keep thinking about what you told me. The fellowship, the trust, everything he did. And I keep wondering if there's more I don't know about." "There's always more. That's what scares me." I didn't reassure him. I felt something closer to emptiness, a hollow acknowledgement that what was happening was necessary, even if it brought no joy. "Tell him I'm thinking of the family," I said. "Are you in my own way?" That night I sat on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere in Connecticut, my father was discovering that the walls he had built around his power were not as solid as he believed. He had spent decades controlling the narrative. But narratives are fragile things. They depend on everyone agreeing to the same story. And one by one, people were starting to question the story my father had told. Daniel called again the next morning, earlier than usual. "Dad's coming to the city tomorrow. He wants to have lunch with me. I think he's going to ask for something." "What makes you think that?" "Because that's the only time he has lunch with me, when he needs something." "You should have lunch," I said. "Listen to what he has to say, and then decide for yourself. Will you be in the city? Maybe we could meet after." Maybe. Something was shifting, not just in my father's circumstances, but in the family itself. The structure that had been so rigid, so unyielding, was starting to show cracks, and I hadn't even done anything yet. Hadn't made accusations, hadn't filed lawsuits, hadn't confronted anyone. I had just stopped pretending, stopped playing the role they had assigned me, stopped being invisible, and that it turned out was enough to start bringing down the walls. My father's lunch with Daniel must have gone differently than he expected, because 2 days later, I received a call I had never anticipated. "Cassie," my father's voice, calling me directly, something he hadn't done in years. "I'd like to see you. I'm in the city for some business. Dinner tonight?" I almost said no, almost claimed a prior commitment, but something stopped me. Curiosity, maybe, or the need to see for myself what desperation looked like on a man who had never experienced it. "Where?" He named a restaurant, a clubby, low-lit institution where the quiet confidence of the patrons eclipsed any need for listed prices, a place where he had taken clients and colleagues for decades. I arrived first, sat at the table he had reserved, ordered sparkling water, and waited. He was 10 minutes late, unusual for a man who considered punctuality a moral virtue. When he entered, I noticed things I had missed at the anniversary party: the slight hunch in his shoulders, the gray around his temples that seemed to have spread, the careful way he moved as if he wasn't sure the floor would hold him. "Cassie," he sat across from me. "Thank you for coming." "Of course." The waiter appeared. My father ordered without looking at the menu, something he had probably ordered 100 times before. I chose something simple. This wasn't a meal, it was a negotiation. "I wanted to talk to you about the family," he began. "About where things stand." "Where do they stand?" He paused, adjusted his napkin, cleared his throat. "I think there may have been some misunderstandings over the years. Things that got complicated." "That's one way to put it. I know you're angry with me. I know you feel wronged. But families are complicated, Cassie. Sometimes decisions are made that seem harsh, but are actually for the best." "Who's best?" "Everyone. The family as a whole." I sipped my water, let the silence stretch. "You're doing well," he said. "The airline, your position. I've been following your progress." "Have you? I'm proud of you. I know I haven't always shown it, but I am." The words landed wrong, like clothes that don't fit, like a performance by someone who had never learned their lines. What do you want, Dad? His mask slipped just for a moment. Surprise flashed across his face. He wasn't used to being asked directly, wasn't used to having his strategies named aloud. I want us to be a family again, a real family. Whatever has happened in the past, we can move forward. And what would that look like? You're spending more time in Connecticut, coming to dinners, being part of things. Being part of things. Yes, you're successful now. You have resources, connections. You could be an asset to the family if you chose to be. There it was. Not love, not reconciliation, usefulness. I could be an asset. I could contribute to the family my father had spent decades trying to exclude me from. I see. It wouldn't have to be complicated. We could keep business separate from personal. I'm not asking you to forgive everything, just to participate, to be present. And in return, he blinked. In return, what would I get from this arrangement? Family, belonging, the things everyone wants. I have those things. I built them myself, with people who didn't spend 30 years treating me like a problem to be managed. The waiter arrived with our food. We sat in silence as plates were arranged, glasses refilled. When he left, my father's expression had hardened. You're making this difficult. Am I? I'm trying to extend an olive branch, to build a bridge, and you're treating it like a hostile negotiation. It is a hostile negotiation, Dad. You just prefer to pretend otherwise. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his wine. I watched him drink. I watched the effort it took for him to maintain composure. I've made mistakes, he said quietly. I know that. I'm not asking you to forget them. I'm asking you to move past them. Move past them, without acknowledgement, without accountability. Just pretend they didn't happen because you've decided it's time. What do you want me to acknowledge? Everything? The fellowship? The trust? The years of being told I was difficult, unstable, too ambitious? The systematic dismantling of every opportunity that came my way? The decision to make Daniel your heir and make me an afterthought? His face had gone pale. Some of those are exaggerations, misinterpretations. I have documentation. I have emails. I have the amendment you signed 1 week after Grandma's funeral. Would you like to see them? That's not... He stopped, started again. Legal matters are complicated. You don't understand the full picture. Then explain it to me. He couldn't. We both knew he couldn't, because the truth was exactly what I had said, and no amount of spin could make it something else. You're going to destroy this family, he said finally. Is that what you want? I'm not going to destroy anything. I'm just not going to pretend anymore. Not going to play the role you assigned me. Not going to be the difficult daughter who needs to be managed and controlled. Then what are you going to do? Nothing. I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to live my life, run my company, build relationships with people who see me for who I am. And whatever happens to your carefully constructed world, it will happen without any action from me. I stood. I placed my napkin on the table. The dinner was your idea, Dad. The reconciliation was your idea. I didn't ask for it. I didn't need it. I just wanted to see if you were actually sorry or if you just wanted to add my success to your collection. Cassie, I have my answer. I walked out of the restaurant, past the maitre d' who knew my father's name, past the bar where powerful men made deals over expensive drinks, out into the evening air where normal people were walking normal lives. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. How did it go? I typed back. He hasn't changed, he just wants new leverage. Daniel's response came quickly. I'm starting to understand that. Call me tomorrow. Tomorrow. I walked for a while. Through the streets I had walked many times before, past buildings that housed fortunes and futures. My father had tried to reclaim me, to pull me back into the family orbit where he could control my narrative benefit from my success, rewrite history to make himself the benevolent patriarch. But you can't reclaim something you threw away, and the daughter he had dismissed was no longer interested in belonging to a family that had never really wanted her in the first place. The conference arrived in May, an annual gathering of aviation industry leaders, board members, executives, investors. the kind of event where fortunes shifted based on conversations in corridors. I had been invited to give a keynote address. The first chairwoman in the airline's history speaking about innovation and leadership in a changing industry. A significant moment for me, though. I tried not to think of it that way. What I hadn't expected was that my father would be there. His name appeared on the guest list 2 weeks before the event. He was attending as a board member of another company, one that had recently entered discussions about a partnership with an airline that happened to be one of our competitors. The world of business is smaller than people realize. Connections thread through industries. Names appear and reappear. Families intersect with corporations in ways that are sometimes coincidental and sometimes not. I saw him across the ballroom before my speech. He was talking with a group of men I didn't recognize, laughing at something, playing the role he had played for decades. The successful attorney, the well-connected board member, the patriarch of a respectable family. Our eyes met a flash of acknowledgement and immediate withdrawal, and I simply turned my attention elsewhere. My speech was scheduled for the afternoon session. I had rehearsed it carefully, focusing on the substance rather than the performance. Facts and figures, vision and strategy, the kind of content that matters to people who move markets. When I took the stage, the room was nearly full. I saw familiar faces in the front rows, industry colleagues, partners, people I had worked with for years. And in the middle section, my father, sitting next to the CEO of the company he represented, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I delivered my speech. We talked about transformation and resilience, about building something that could weather uncertainty, about the value of perspective that comes from unexpected places. I didn't look at my father while I spoke. I didn't need to. The applause at the end was generous. The questions from the audience were thoughtful. I handled them with the confidence that comes from knowing your subject inside and out. When I stepped down from the stage, people approached. Handshakes and congratulations, business cards exchanged, the normal ritual of networking. And then a voice I didn't expect. "Impressive presentation, Ms. Riley." I turned. A man I vaguely recognized. Silver-haired, expensive suit, the bearing of someone who expected to be listened to. "Marcus Wellington," he said, extending his hand. "I'm on the board of Apex Airlines. We've been following your work with great interest." "Thank you. I must say, when I first heard about you, I was skeptical. Young women in a traditionally male-dominated field, family background in law rather than aviation, but you've proven yourself." I smiled politely. I knew where this was going. "I have to ask," Marcus continued, "and forgive me if this is indiscreet, but your father, Robert Harrington, he's here today, isn't he?" "He is." "I've known Robert for years. Good man, very respected in legal circles." He paused. "Funny thing, though, I never knew he had a daughter in aviation. He never mentioned you. Not once." I let the silence hold for a moment before responding. "My father and I have different interests. We don't often discuss work." "I see." Marcus nodded slowly. "Well, whatever the family dynamics, you've certainly made your mark. If you ever want to discuss opportunities at Apex, my door is open." He moved away, but his words lingered. I never knew he had a daughter. My father had spent years telling me I was too ambitious, too difficult, too unstable. But he had also spent those same years making sure no one knew I existed, hiding me from his professional world, erasing me from conversations where my name might have opened doors. I found a quiet corner, pulled out my phone, checked messages. Daniel had texted, "Saw a clip of your speech online. Proud of you." Jennifer, his wife, had added, "Amazing work, we should celebrate soon." Nothing from my parents. The afternoon reception began. More mingling, more handshakes, more business cards. I noticed something as I moved through the crowd. People were looking at me differently, not just with interest, but with curiosity, with questions in their eyes. Word was spreading about my keynote, about who I was, about the disconnect between my visibility and my father's apparent invisibility when it came to acknowledging me. I saw my father across the room again. He was standing with a smaller group now. Fewer people seek him out, fewer laughs. His posture had changed, less confident, more defensive. One of the men near him said something and gestured in my direction. My father's face tightened. He responded with something that looked like dismissal. The man's eyebrows rose. I watched this exchange without approaching. I watched as the dynamics of the room shifted around my father like sand beneath waves. He had built his reputation on authority, on being the center of things, on having all the information and controlling how it flowed. But now, there was information he didn't control, a daughter he couldn't explain away, a success story that didn't fit his narrative. The reception wound down. People began making their exits. I said goodbyes to colleagues, confirmed follow-up meetings, played the game you play at industry events. As I was heading toward the door, my father intercepted me. A moment. I stopped, waited. "That was quite a speech," he said. His voice was neutral, but his eyes were not. "You've come a long way." "Thank you." Several people asked me about you afterward, about our relationship, about why I never mentioned having a daughter in the industry. "What did you tell them?" I said, "Family matters are private." "That's one way to put it." He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "This isn't sustainable, Cassie. Us being in the same circles, people asking questions, it creates complications." "Complications for whom?" "For everyone. The family, your career, my reputation." I looked at him. This man who had been the center of my universe for so long, who had defined my understanding of myself and my place in the world. "Your reputation is your concern, Dad, not mine. I'm not going to apologize for being successful. I'm not going to hide to make you more comfortable. I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to be discreet, to manage the situation. The situation you created by pretending I didn't exist. The situation where you sabotaged my career and then acted surprised when I built one anyway. That situation." His face reddened. "Keep your voice down." "My voice is exactly where it needs to be. The question is whether yours is." I walked away, left him standing there in the emptying ballroom. Outside, the spring air was fresh and clean. I breathed it in. I felt something release in my chest. The room hadn't looked at my father the way it used to. People had noticed, questioned, I wondered. The narrative he had maintained for so long was developing cracks, and all I had done was show up, do my job, be visible. That was the thing about truth. It didn't require accusation. It just required light. The calls started 3 days later, first from my mother, then from Daniel, then from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all with variations of the same message. My father was upset. Something had happened at the conference. There was talk in his professional circles. I didn't respond to most of them. Let the voicemails accumulate. What I hadn't anticipated was my father's response. Rather than pulling back, retreating, reconsidering, he did what he always did when challenged. He doubled down. I learned about it from Daniel, who called me on a Thursday morning sounding rattled. "Dad's planning something," he said. "He called me yesterday. He wants to have a family meeting this weekend. Everyone is together to address the situation." "What situation?" "You, your success, the way people at the conference were talking. He thinks the family needs to present a united front." "A united front against what?" "Against whatever narrative you're creating, I think. He kept saying the family needs to get ahead of this, control the story." I set down my coffee. I looked out at the city. What exactly does he think I'm doing? He's not being specific, but he mentioned lawyers, said something about protecting family assets, making sure everyone's interests are aligned. Everyone's interests, meaning his interests. Probably. "Cassie, I don't know what to do here. Jennifer's worried. The kids have been asking why Grandpa sounds angry on the phone. You should do what you think is right. I'm not going to tell you to take sides." That's the problem. I don't know what's right anymore. For so long, Dad's word was law. If he said something was true, it was true. If he said something was necessary, it was necessary. But now you're questioning. Yeah, now I'm questioning everything. I hung up, sat with what Daniel had told me. My father was panicking. Not in an obvious way, he would never show that publicly, but in the way of someone who has lost control and is scrambling to reclaim it. A family meeting, a united front, lawyers protecting assets. All the moves of a man who feels his foundation shifting beneath him. The family meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. I wasn't invited, or rather I was quite pointedly excluded. My mother called apologetic and nervous to explain that your father thinks it's best if you're not there for the initial discussion. I understand, I said. Cassie, I want you to know I tried. I told him that excluding you was wrong, that it would only make things worse. What did he say? He said it wasn't about excluding you. It was about having an honest conversation without worrying about what you might do with the information. About what I might do. Yes. I let the silence sit for a moment. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. All these years, all the times Dad said things about me, did things to me, made decisions about my life, did you ever tell him to stop? Not just think about it. Actually tell him. My mother's breathing was audible through the phone, shaky, uncertain. I tried, she said finally, in my own way. That's what I thought. I didn't go to Connecticut on Saturday. I went to work instead, reviewed contracts, took calls, did the things that needed doing. But I had made arrangements. Daniel texted me that evening. The meeting was intense. Dad laid out his concerns. We talked about family reputation, about protecting what we've built, wanted everyone to agree not to discuss family matters with outsiders. And did everyone agree? Some did. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Paul, they always side with Dad. And you? I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. I said I needed to think about it. That's probably wise. Cassie, there's more. Dad showed us documents, financial stuff, trust information. He said there might need to be changes made, adjustments, to ensure the family's future. What kind of adjustments? I don't know exactly, but he mentioned something about restructuring, about making sure assets are protected from potential litigation. I smiled, though Daniel couldn't see it. My father was worried enough to start moving money, to start making changes that might shield him from the consequences of his own actions. But moves like that left trails, paper trails, electronic trails, the kind of trails that made lawyers' jobs easier, not harder. Keep me posted, I said, and Daniel, be careful about what you sign. Why? Because our father is not acting in everyone's best interest. He's acting on his own, and anyone who doesn't understand that is going to regret it. The following week brought more developments. My father reached out to several board members at companies where I had connections attempting to gather information about my business dealings. He hired a private investigator. I learned about this from Eleanor, whose network was extensive to look into my finances. He called former classmates of mine from business school, former colleagues from my early career, people who might have grievances, stories to tell. He was building a case. Not a legal case necessarily, a narrative case. Trying to find evidence that I was unstable, vindictive, not to be trusted. He was using the same playbook he had used when I was 23, reaching out to people, planting seeds of doubt, attempting to control information before it could be used against him. But there was a difference this time. I wasn't 23 anymore. I wasn't invisible. And the people he was contacting knew who I was, knew my work, had seen my success with their own eyes. The seeds he tried to plant found no purchase. Instead, they generated questions about him, about his motives, about why a father would be trying to undermine his own daughter. The private investigator was particularly illuminating. He turned up nothing on me. There was nothing to find, but his inquiries created ripples. People talked. Word spread. Robert Harrington was investigating his own daughter. What kind of family dysfunction would lead to that? My father had spent decades building a reputation for judgment and discretion. Now his actions were calling both into question. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to wait. The shareholders' meeting was scheduled for the first week of June, an annual event, usually routine, presentations about performance, votes on governance matters, the kind of corporate formality that passes without drama. This year was different. The airline had received an acquisition offer, a major competitor looking to consolidate. The board had recommended rejection, but shareholders had questions about valuation, about strategy, about whether the company's leadership was acting in their interests. As chairwoman, I would be at the center of the discussions. What no one expected, what I hadn't entirely expected, was that the meeting would also bring other matters to light. It started with an anonymous letter, sent to the Securities and Exchange Commission with copies to major shareholders, alleging improprieties in trust management involving a company that had early investment in our airline. The company named in the letter was one my father had helped structure years ago, during the period when he was managing family trusts, during the period when my inheritance had been quietly redirected. I learned about the letter from our legal counsel, who called me the night before the meeting. "This is going to come up tomorrow," she said. "People are asking questions. The SEC is making preliminary inquiries. What do you need from me? Clarity about your relationship to the entity named, about any family involvement in our company's early financing." The involvement was minimal. My grandfather invested through the family trust. My father managed that trust. I was excluded from decisions about it. Excluded how? Through an amendment I wasn't informed about, one that transferred my beneficial interest to my brother. Silence on the line. Then, "Do you have documentation of this? Extensive documentation. Can you share it? If the board needs it, yes, I have nothing to hide." The shareholders' meeting convened at 9 the next morning, a hotel ballroom filled with investors, analysts, board members, cameras from financial news outlets. I sat at the front table with the CEO, the CFO, and the lead independent director. We worked through the agenda, performance reports, strategic outlook, the acquisition offer, and why we recommended rejecting it. Then came questions from the floor. Standard inquiries on forward guidance and market capture. The usual concerns. Then a man stood. Gray suit, expensive tie. The kind of person who represents institutional investors. "I have a question for the chairwoman." I nodded. "There have been reports circulating about irregularities in the family trust that was an early investor in this airline. Can you clarify your relationship to that trust and whether there are any conflicts of interest we should be aware of?" The room went very quiet. I had prepared for this, had known since the anonymous letter emerged that this moment was coming. "Thank you for the question," I said. "The trust you're referring to was established by my grandfather and managed by my father. I was originally a beneficiary, but my beneficial interest was transferred to my brother through an amendment I was not informed about at the time. I discovered this several years ago through document review. I have no current financial interest in that trust." The man nodded. "And the irregularities alleged in the letter?" "Those concern my father's management decisions, not my own. I have had no involvement in the trust's administration. Any questions about its operations should be directed to its current trustee." More questions followed. I answered them calmly, honestly, and completely. Each answer led to more questions. Each question revealed more about a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond my personal experience. The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the time it ended, several things had become clear. The trust my father had managed was being investigated, not because of anything I had said or done, but because his actions over the years had created a paper trail that couldn't be explained away. The amendment that had disinherited me was being reviewed by regulators. The notarization appeared to be fraudulent. The signatures were potentially forged, and my father's name, the name he had spent decades building and protecting, was now associated with words like investigation and irregularities in the financial press. I left the meeting, found a quiet corner of the hotel lobby, sat down. My phone was already buzzing, messages from Daniel, from my mother, from relatives who had attended the family meeting the week before. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat and watched the city move past the windows. Business people heading to lunch, tourists consulting maps, the normal flow of normal lives. My father had been exposed, not by accusation, not by confrontation, by the natural consequence of actions he had taken years ago finally catching up to him. I hadn't needed to say a word. The truth had said everything for me. The weeks after the shareholders' meeting passed in a blur of legal proceedings and media attention that I did my best to stay distant from. My father's attorneys filed motions. Investigators requested documents. I gave no interviews, made no public statements. Let my lawyers handle the procedural matters while I focused on the work that had always grounded me. My mother called in late June. She sounded older than I remembered, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Your father's very ill," she said. "The stress, his heart. The doctors are concerned." "I'm sorry to hear that. He's asking for you, Cassie. He wants to talk." I considered this. The man who had spent my entire life dismissing me, undermining me, erasing me, now facing his own mortality, suddenly wanting connection. What does he want to say? I don't know. He won't tell me. He just says he needs to talk to you. Before, I'll think about it. I did think about it, for several days. What would I gain from seeing him? Apologies rarely changed anything, but there was a curiosity that wouldn't quiet, a need to see for myself what happened when all the power structures collapsed. I called my mother back. "I'll come this weekend." The house in Connecticut looked the same. The familiar white colonial facade and the flagpole with its 2 flags now drooping in the stillness of the summer heat. But inside, everything was different. Hospital bed in the study, medical equipment beeping softly, the smell of illness and antiseptic. My father was propped against pillows, his face drawn and pale, smaller than I remembered, diminished. "Cassie," his voice was weak, "you came. Mom said you wanted to talk." "Yes. Sit down, please." I sat in the chair beside his bed. "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything. The trust, the fellowship, all of it." "Have you?" "I made mistakes. I know that now. I thought I was doing what was best, but—" He coughed, took a moment to recover. "But I was wrong. About a lot of things." I waited. "I saw my mother in you," he continued. "From the time you were young. The same stubbornness, the same refusal to accept my authority. So you tried to stop me. I tried to keep things from falling apart the way they did with her, to maintain order. By eliminating the challenger." He closed his eyes. "Yes, I suppose that's exactly what I did." The room was quiet, except for the beeping of the heart monitor. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I know I don't deserve it. I'm just asking you to understand. I was afraid, Cassie. My whole life I was afraid of becoming what my father was, so I made sure that would never happen to me. And in the process you became something worse." "Yes." His eyes opened, met mine. "Yes, I became something worse." "I don't forgive you," I said. "I don't know if I ever will. But I'm not angry anymore either. I've built a life that has nothing to do with your approval or your opposition. Whatever you did, it didn't stop me." "I know. I've watched. You've become everything I was afraid of, and more." "I've become myself, that's all." He reached out. "I have something for you. In the desk drawer. An envelope. I had the lawyers prepare it." I found the envelope. Inside a document. An amendment to the trust properly notarized restoring my original beneficial interest. "It won't fix anything," he said. "But it's what I can do. I can still do it." I looked at the document. "Thank you. Will you come back while there's still time?" "I don't know. I'll think about it." I stood, moved toward the door. "Cassie." I turned. "You were right, about all of it. I just wanted you to know that I know." I nodded. And then I left. I drove back to the city that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Let the miles pass without music, without distraction. Something had ended, not dramatically, just the quiet conclusion of a conflict that had defined my life. I hadn't won. That wasn't the right word for what had happened. I had simply stopped letting them define me, stopped seeking their approval. I was free. That was the victory. My phone buzzed. "Daniel, I heard you went to see Dad. How was it?" "Complicated, sad, honest maybe for the first time." "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I think I am." "Want to get dinner this week? Just us. No family drama. Just brother and sister." I smiled. I'd like that. I hung up. Keep driving. The city lights appeared on the horizon, glittering against the darkening sky. The power isn't in the confrontation. It's not revenge. It's in becoming who you were meant to be, regardless of what they say or do. You can live anyway. You can live